Kia ora and welcome back to the series on how to make your first website. In the last video we looked at HTML, hypertext markup language, and we learned that that is used to make the content of your website. It's the first thing you have to do whenever you're making a website because it's what puts the stuff on there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at CSS, the second of the three languages that you need to know to build a modern website. And CSS is in charge of the styling. So what do I mean when I say styling? Well, if we go back to our website here, you can see that I've just made a few minor changes. I've added this banner up the top and taken out the media to make it easier for you to follow along. But mostly it's the same as what we did in the last video. But it's not very nice looking, this website. It is all kind of just black and white and stuff's just placed on the page. I've got no control over what color it is, what size it is, or anything like that. So CSS is going to help us control some of those things so that we can make things look a little nicer than they do right now. And we're going to start off by going to Visual Studio Code. So this is where all of our markup or our code is for our website here. This is our index.html, our home page, and then up here I also have our voting page as well. We're going to make a new text file by going to File, New Text File. And this one here is going to be our CSS document, our style sheet. So I'm straight away going to save it. I'm going to go File and then Save. And typically we do this in the same folder as our HTML files, and we will call this style.css. We pretty much always call our style sheet style.css. It's a convention so that both browser and other people know what this is. See, now that I've saved it, you can see that up there that's actually changed the icon. So now Visual Studio Code knows what kind of document this is. Before we can use the style sheet, we need to tell our HTML pages that this is what we want them to look for when they're trying to find the styling for our website. So we're going to go back to our HTML page and we're going to go into the head section. So remember, inside the head tags is where we put information about our website. It's not something that actually appears on the page, it's just things about our website. So in here, we're going to link this page to our style sheet by opening up a tag, and the tag is going to be link. We're going to link to what? Well, we're going to go rel style sheet. So we're linking to a style sheet. And then we're going to find out, well, what style sheet is it that we're linking to by going ref style.css, and you can see there that because it's in the same folder, Visual Studio Code is already finding it for me. So I'm hitting tab there, and then I can just close that tag. So now I've got a tag here that says, hey, I want you, Mr. Index.html, to link to a style sheet, and that's the style sheet here that I want you to link to. So I can save that one up, and I can take that as well and copy it, and I can also put it on this page here if I would also like to link my voting page to the style sheet. So now they're all linked up and I can start doing my styling. So what's the first piece of styling that I want to do? Well, I want to access an element. So if I go back to my website, I can see I've got all these different elements on here. And I'm going to start with my headings. My headings at the moment are nice, but they're just black and I kind of want them to stand out a little bit more, so I'm going to give them a color. Now, when I was thinking about colors for my website, I went to this website here to help me come up with which colors I wanted to use. You don't have to do this. You can go to a bunch of websites, so you can just come up with your own kind of color scheme. And I went to start the generator, and this website here is really cool because it gives you a bunch of colors to start off with, and you can kind of just hit the space bar and it will do more colors. When you find some colors you like, I, for example, am looking at Wales and they're blue, so I might lock in that color there, and it's going to find other colors that match the color that you want. So it's quite a cool website to help you kind of figure out some colors. So maybe I'd go for some greens or something like that until I find some colors that I like, and then up here you can export an image of them. In fact, I have already done so. Here are the colors that I want, and you can see that it's given me the hex codes here for my colors. So those are what I'm going to use when I'm putting them into my website. Okay, so my headings here, I want to make a kind of pinkish color. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and it's my headings I want to access. Now my headings, this one is H1. So the first one at the top is an H1 heading. So I'm just going to write H1. That's how the style sheet knows that I'm talking about H1, and I'm going to open up one of these curly kind of brackets. We call them curly braces. And in here, I'm going to tell it some information about the color I want to use. So I'm going to go color, spelt the American way with no U, and then I can see that it's coming up here, but I'm just going to do it manually and put in a colon and a space. And then what I can do is I can go to the color I want. So in my case, I'm going to use this color, EFA9AE. Okay, so I'm going to go hash EFA 9AE. You can see there that Visual Studio Code kind of knows what color that is. It puts this little thing here. This is not actually in my code. It's just kind of something that Visual Studio Code overlays to show me, oh yeah, okay, this is the color that you want. And then I'm going to put a semicolon at the end of that line to tell my style sheet that's the end of that line. Same deal up here with the white dot, so it's not saved. So I'm going to hit Control S to save, and then go back to my website and refresh it. And there we go. My H1 is now nice and pink. That's exactly what I wanted to happen. Now let's say it's not just my H1 that I want to be pink, because I've got H1 here, H2 here, and I believe these are H3. We could just double check that if we wanted to. We've got in here an H1, an H2, and an H3. So let's say I wanted my H1 and my H2 also to have the same styling. So I want this one also to be pink. Well, I can go back here, and I can access two elements at the same time by just putting a comma here, and then going H2. So now both my H1 and my H2 are going to have the color of that kind of pinky, rosy, goldy situation there. So save that up, go back, and there we go. Now my H2s are also pink. This one here, and this one here as well. So the structure here, just to remind you, is that we say what element it is, or which multiple elements with a comma. We have our curly braces, and inside those curly braces we go, okay, what attribute is it we want to change, and what do we want to change it to? We can continue doing that if we want. So for example, let's say that I want to change the font of my headings as well. So I'm going to go font dash, and you can see there are a bunch of options here that I could pick from. We're going to go with font family, so I'm going to click that, automatically puts it in. Automatically put my semicolon on the end as well, which is nice. And it's given me some suggestions here of fonts that I might want to use. You can see that it's giving multiple fonts on the same line, and the reason for that is that the person who is loading your website may not have all the same fonts installed on their computer that you do. So we give redundancies. We go, okay, well, I want the font to be Courier New, but if they don't have that, then use Courier. If they don't have that, use monospace, and after that it'll use whatever the browser default is that they've got. So I'm looking at some fonts here, and I think given that our website is about aquatic creatures, we're going to choose Gill Sans for our font. Okay, so it's going to choose Gill Sans. If it can't find that, it'll do Gill Sans MT. If it can't find that, it'll do Calibri. If it can't find that, it'll do this one, then this one. Then it'll go to whatever the browser's default font is after that. I'm going to hit save, and when I go back, I should see my H1 and my H2 both change their font. There we go. So now we've got this nice kind of blocky font here of Gill Sans on our website. Fantastic. What else do we want to change on our website? Well, I think next I want to work on the size of these headings. They're not quite big enough for me, so I'm going to go back to my CSS file, and I could work on this in here. I could change the font size in here. However, it would change both of these to be exactly the same font size, and I don't want that. I want my H2s to be smaller than my H1s. So instead, I'm going to access each of these separately with H1 and then some curly braces. Then in here, I'm going to go font dash, and you can see there are lots of options. I'm going to go font size. It's automatically put in that semicolon for me, and there are many different units that you might want to use in here for font size. I'm just going to show you two. So the first one you might be more familiar with is pixels. So I could go 40px in there and say, well, my font size is going to be 40px, and then refresh this, and you can see that my H1 got a little bit bigger there. If you didn't notice it, you could quickly go back in the video. I don't really like pixels as a unit. I find it difficult in my head to kind of think about the relative different sizes. I instead like to use something called rem. You could go ahead with pixels if you want, but I like rem. So what is rem? Rem is a relative size of unit, and it works off the size of your HTML font. So your HTML will have a default font size in there. Usually it's 16 pixels. So your font size across all of your document, you can actually set it yourself if you want. You can make it 10 pixels, you can make it whatever you want, but by default, it's normally 16. So when I put in one rem, what I'm saying is I want this to be 16. I want it to be 1 times 16, 1 unit. So I refresh this, it's 1 times 16. I probably want it to be a bit bigger than that though, so I'm going to go about 2.5 rems for me. And then look at that. Yeah, that's about the size that I want, 2.5 rems. So this makes it easy for me to kind of think in smaller units relative to all my other headings. So when I now set H2, instead of thinking, well, okay, how many pixels is that, and what's the relative different size between H1 and H2, I can just go font size. This one's 2.5, so maybe I'll make my H2 1.5 rem. something like that. I can kind of easily see the difference between 1.5 and 2.5 in my head. It makes it easy for me to think about. I'm saving up my document, going back here. There we go. Refresh this. I've got 2.5 and 1.5 rem. So I like to use rem. You could use pixels if you want. Rem is just the HTML's default size, which you can change yourself if you want. It's usually 16 by default, and then after that you can work off rems. So that's how we do font size. Now I'm starting to get a little bit of information in here, so I want to comment my document so that I can understand it well and others can understand it well, especially my teacher. So for comments in CSS, I can use this format, a slash, then an asterisk, and then in between that an asterisk and another /. So in here I'm just going to call this area text. All the changes I'm doing to the text in my document are going to happen in here. I'm going to hit save there. This doesn't actually do anything in my document. If I go back here and refresh, nothing's going to change. It's just a reminder for me to know that this is the text area in my CSS. I think I'd also like to change the styling of my paragraphs on my page. So that's just the normal text in here. I'd like to change the font family for this as well. So I'm going to go font family. And I'm not going to use the same thing as my headings, but I want to use the same kind of like blocky-ish sort of font, that kind of thing. So I think I'm going to go with this set here, Arial, Helvetica, and Sans Serif. You actually can start just typing this in yourself if you want, like Helvetica, and you don't actually have to keep to these in here. So that's the set that I'm going to use. I don't like Arial as much, it's used too much, it's everywhere, so I'm going to delete that one off and just have Helvetica and Sans Serif and then the default font if we can't find anything else. I'm going to save that up because I've got a white dot up here, go back, and there we go. Now I've got a kind of sans serif, more of a chunky modern font for my website. One thing that I should also do in here, because I'm using rems, is just set this in here to 1 rem for the font size. You don't have to do this per se, but if you go here, nothing's going to change. But if I change the default font size in the future, it just means everything will scale. So what do I mean by that? So if I go HTML and I change the font size in here for my HTML, instead of 16, let's say something really big and noticeable like 25px, then all of this is going to change relative to each other though. So this went up from 16 to 25 times 2.5. This went up from 16 to 25, but these all went up by the same amount. So it's all staying consistent because I've got that in there. I don't actually want it to be that big though, so I'm just going to get rid of that for now and bring this back down. So that's what I mean when I say a relative font size. Okay, enough playing around with text. Let's do something else as well. Let's have a look at the background for our website. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to put a little comment for myself, background, and I'm going to change first the background color of my website. So how do I do that? I'm going to start by accessing the body element. So what is the body element? Do we recall what that is? If we go back here, you remember that we've got the head, where everything that's information about our website goes, and then we've got body, where the content of our website goes. So in here, in the body, that's what I want to change the background of. So body, and I'm going to change the background color. That's what I want there. What am I going to change it to? Well, you may recall I have my list here. I'm going to use this one, BCD 7EB. BCD 7EB. That's the color that I want to use. I need to put a hash in front of that. So there we go. That's the color that I want my background to be. So if I hit save, go back here and refresh. Now I've got a nice blue background, and these colors mostly work together. I think maybe my heading is a little hard to read there on top of the blue, so I'm going to go back and I'm thinking about accessibility. I'm thinking about people that might have trouble seeing the difference in there, and I can actually click on this or just hover over it, and then I can go in here and I can click around like this. So I'm going to bring this down, I'm going to make it a little bit darker so that it's easy for people to read. And when I let go, you can see that that now is that. So it used to be EFA 9AE, now it's changed to this automatically. So that's a cool little feature that VS Code has. Save this up and go back to my website. There we go. Okay, that's a lot easier to read. It's a lot darker and it's a little less happy, so I might play with it a little bit more until I get something that I like and I think is easy to read. When I say I think it's easy to read, I can actually check that if I want. I could go to a website like Contrast Checker, and I can have a look in here and click on this, and then I can put in the values of the colors that I'm using. So in my case, I'm using this color here, and this is on the foreground, this is in the front, this is my text, and in the background, I'm using this background color. So pop that in there as well. And you can see that it's giving me a contrast ratio of 1.42 to 1, which is not quite good enough. You can see down here it's saying fail, fail, fail. We want something at least 4.5 to 1 and 3 to 1 for large text. So I'm going to have to mess around with this just a little bit more to try to get that higher. And we can pass if we go with something a lot darker. Maybe that one there. It's not going to be quite what I'd hoped for, but accessibility is more important than what I feel is nice. There we go. That's a lot easier for people to read. Now, I don't just have to have a background color though. So let's say I want to go with a different kind of design. I could also use a background image. I'm just going to comment out this for now. So commenting out is when you just put comments around a line, and now it doesn't exist anymore because it just thinks this is a comment. So I'm going to go background dash image, and then in here I need to put some form of image. So what I've got is, if I go to my whale site folder, go into images, I've got myself this whale BG. I've got two of them actually. I've got this one here, this is the solid one, and then I've also got one that I've made slightly transparent. I'm going to use the transparent one, and you'll see why that might be useful soon. In here I need to put URL, and then I need to start writing where this image is. In my case it's in the images folder. And then I'm looking for whale background transparent, that one right there. So I can save that up and then refresh it, and there we go. I've got a really nice kind of easy to see background. If I use the other one, these lines would be hard black and it would be difficult to see, so I can show you what that would have looked like. If I refresh, you can see this one, it's a lot starker, but it makes my text really difficult to read. So that's kind of one of the reasons that I'm using this transparent background. It's just a little more washed out, and I kind of like the effect a lot more as well. It's not so in your face. The other thing the transparent background lets me do is it lets me see my background color through it. So if I have my background color and my image, which is a bit transparent, then I can have both of them together, which I think is a really nice effect and makes things look like they are underwater. Now I'm going to turn my attention to these buttons at the top, and I've already written some CSS code in order for us to change these buttons from what they look like to something else. So here in my CSS, I've got a new section that's called navigation buttons, and you can see I've added some CSS in here. I am not going to go through and explain all of this to you. You've got something called background color. You've got another thing in here called padding, text align that's set to center, no border, the cursor is a pointer, and then for my anchor tags, you can see that I've got color white and font weight bold. That is going to change how my website looks, or specifically how these buttons look. When I refresh the page, they now look like this. A little more relevant to my website with the blue and things like that. Your job is to have a look at these, then have a look at this code and see if you can figure out what each of these things is doing. If you can, fantastic. If you're not sure, ask your teacher, and even if you think you are sure, maybe just check that you are correct on everything that you're thinking. If figuring out all of that fails, I'm sure you can find me around somewhere as well. On to the next problem on my website. So if I scroll down to the bottom here, I have this references section that I'm very proud of because I'm doing the right thing and I am telling my users where all of my images came from. However, the problem that I have is that this is an H3. I want this section to kind of blend into the background a little bit. I want people to know that it's important information, but that it's not the core part of the website. It's not about the whales. So I wanted to blend it into the background by changing the color of this to more of a light gray. And I'm going to start with the heading. However, these are H3s as well. So the titles of blue whale, narwhal, humpback whale, etc. are all H3. So if I go to my CSS to where I've changed the H3 here, and I go color, and I go something like a gray or something like that, now what I've done on here is I've changed all of these to gray, and I don't want all of these to blend into the background, just the references ones. So I'm going to go back and undo what I just did there. So to do this and to access just this references at the bottom, I need to use something called a class. A class in CSS lets you apply styling to just the elements you want to apply it to. So let me give you an example of what a class looks like. If I go down to here to do a class, I'm just going to set up a heading for now. I don't really know what I'm going to call this just yet. Maybe references section. We do a dot. And a dot indicates that what I'm setting up now is a class. You might want to call it a period. I'm going to call it a dot. So I'm going to call this dot refs for references. So any styling I put in here is only going to be for the elements that are associated with the class dot refs, and I'll show you how to do that soon. So I'm going to go color. And for my color, I'm going to do something like 5D 737 EFF. I think that's like a gray. Yeah, there we go. That's a nice kind of gray there. Okay, so I'm going to save that one up, and nothing is going to happen yet. So nothing has changed to gray, and the reason for that is I haven't told my index.html which elements I want to use this new class refs on. So if I go back to my HTML here, this is what I want to use it on. We add this as an attribute. So I go into the tag, and I'm going to go class equals refs. No dot here. The dot is only when we set it up. So in here, it's just class equals refs and quotation marks. Just this tag has the class of refs. If I go back and I refresh this, you can see now that this is gray, but my other H3s are not. So I can change just that individual element. But what if I wanted all of this to be gray? Is there some way that I can section this into its own little box, its own little container, as we call them, so that it can have the styling of this class applied to all of it? I could go in here and I could change my UL class to refs as well. And then on every single thing, I could change that. That looks nice. But imagine this was a big website and I had a bunch of different elements in here. I'd have to go into every single tag and change it all to refs. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to section off this area using a container. The container that I'm going to use, because there are a bunch of them that you'll learn later if you do grid-based design, is going to be called a div, a division. And then we put it like this. So now I've got a div and everything is in there. Everything's within this div. And what I can do is I can go into my div and I can put an attribute of class and I can go refs. So now this container and everything that's inside it, things that we call the children of the container, should have the class of refs. We save that up. Refresh, we can see that that is true. So I've only had to do it here, and anything I add in here is going to have that styling. So if I add a new paragraph in here, a little test paragraph to show how containers work, and I save that and I refresh, you can see that this paragraph here has that styling. It's gray as well. So no matter how many things I have inside this div, it's going to give them all that class refs. So whenever it is that you want styling on multiple things that are all together, you can section them off like that and use a class on them. And to quickly recap that in our code, because I did that very quickly, we started in our style sheet and we made a new class using a dot or a period, and I called it refs for references. I changed the color in there. In order for me to actually apply that in my website, I need to say which HTML elements I want this applied to. So I went in here and at first I just wanted the heading, so I put the class in the heading, but then I decided it was the whole section here that I wanted to be gray. So I used a container called div, and I put everything inside of that container. Then when I put the class on that container, everything within that container, its children, gets that class applied. In our case, it was all made to be gray. So that's basically everything you need to know about CSS. We'll do a quick recap and then I'll show you a little bit of an extra thing for experts. You've learned how to access individual elements like this H1 element here and how to change the properties for them, in this case font size. You've learned how to access multiple elements at once by using a comma to separate them out. You've also learned how to use comments to identify the different parts of your code in your styling sheet. Down here you've learned how to change background color and images. You've learned how to make a bunch of changes to buttons, and you've learned how to use classes to change individual tags. You've also learned how to use a container, and that means that you can change whole sections of your website just using one class by putting everything inside a container and adding a class to that container. Right, an extra for experts now. You may have noticed in my button navigations I've added this little bit of code. This is something we call a pseudo class. So you can see that I've got a colon and then hover, no spaces in this one. It actually won't work properly if you add spaces. So I already have background color here, and then I've added on here, well, when you hover over this button, please change the background color to this instead. It's a darker blue, so I'm trying to signify diving deeper into the ocean when you click on my links, and it looks a little something like this. And when I hover over a button, now it goes a darker blue. It gives great feedback to the user. They can easily see which button they're clicked on, and it means that I've got really neat styling going on there. So I learned that from a website called W3 Schools. You can get to it by going W3 Schools, and I'll put in CSS as well just to kind of get us here faster. CSS tutorial, and you can see lots of things here. Along the left side, you can scroll down, you can learn stuff. And they have these little editors that you can try it out yourself. It's really useful. If I click try it yourself, you can see that I get the code and I also get an example of what it looks like. So if I go and I change this H1 heading here to a nice pink, and then I hit run, you can see that it updates. So this is a really good place for you to learn new tricks if you're trying to figure out something new or there's something you want to happen. So that's everything you need to know about CSS for now. I hope that you're feeling like you can go out and style your website to make it look very nice, just like this one here. I will see you in the next one.